evening and welcome. You're watching The Big Story on NDTV Profit and I'm Nupur Talwar Suri. The Union Communications Minister, Jyotiraditya Scindia, met various stakeholders of the telecom industry today. Now, the meeting was to lay a strategic roadmap for the sector's growth. 6 committees were formed to streamline policy and regulations. The meeting was the first after major telecom companies hiked tariffs. But even as these companies raised tariffs, a recent survey by local circles shows how connectivity issues have left customers dissatisfied. And a large number of them have had to resort to the internet or Wi-Fi to make calls. So why are telecom majors unable to resolve connectivity issues? We discuss both the roadmap for the telecom sector and the consumer issues in the show. But first, let's listen to what the minister said about making India a telecom superpower.
We've identified a rather deep agenda for all 3 committees. Now, the members of these committees and us will be working together. There are varied schedules for the first presentation of these committees over the next couple of weeks. And then we will be taking each individual issue at a time, delving into the details and devising an action plan with clearly timelines and actionable items so that we can take our sector forward. These 6 committees are the backbone of the communications sector in India. And by forging these committees, we hope to take the sector forward, realizing Prime Minister's goal of creating not only an Atmanirbhar Bharat, but a telecom superpower within India that will hopefully transcend our boundaries in the days to come.
Let's also go across to Smriti Chaudhary of NDTV Profit to understand the issues faced by the sector.
3 players raised their tariffs a couple of days ago, and those hikes were between 10 to 15%. However, according to a local circle survey, 89% of subscribers are reporting call connection and drop difficulties. 38% are experiencing such issues in over 20% of these calls, and 1 in every 3 people are making calls over WhatsApp and other OTT platforms. Now, there's an overall increase as well, according to that report, in the percentage of those who are forced to now use these OTT platforms to make calls. This is in comparison to 2022. Now, the question is, why are the tariffs being raised? Well, the simple answer is India is one of those countries having the lowest tariff rates across the world. For context, in Airtel in 2011 had a plan which charged 750 rupees for a 2 GB with 30-day validity for 3G services. Today, that plan costs 179 for 2 GB with validity of 28 days. So that means that after the entry of Jio in the markets, there was a massive price decrease in these plans. However, that has helped in data penetration across the country. But now it's time, according to these operators, it is time to repair those tariffs and to increase those tariffs. Now, this was the 3rd hike that was taken. First one was in 2019, then in 2021, and now this was the 3rd one. There are likely more hikes that we're going to see in the medium term, according to analysts. Now, operators have started to take some tariff increases, but the overall tariff still remains well below the global average of $8. India somewhere lies between $2 or thereabouts. Now, improved operators' profitability and return ratios is the key reason why these tariffs are being increased. Remember, these operators have put in thousands of crores of money for 5G, and now to get those returns on that capital employed, they will have to increase those tariffs. Now, TRAI has also taken note of the issues of the subscribers. Now, TRAI has proposed to tighten call drop parameters, call success rate, etc. under the quality of service rules. Now, on overall basis, these players are meeting the overall quality of service benchmarks, but there may be pockets in some areas that might be facing troubles. This is according to TRAI, and now TRAI has stepped up and has formed a committee to look into these issues as well.
All right. In fact, let's now go across to Mr. Sanjay Kapoor. He's an entrepreneur and advisor and the former CEO of Airtel for India and South Asia. Good evening, Mr. Kapoor. Thank you very much for joining us. Now,
Hi, Nupur. Evening to you and viewers.
Mr. Kapoor, we just had the details of the survey where, customers seem to have a lot of connectivity issues despite the tariff hikes. In fact, you must have seen some of those memes that have gone viral about in social media. That, of course, is in a lighter vein. But why are telecom companies largely unable to resolve this?
Yes, it's $1 million question, and I'll try to peel the onion a bit for you. Rightly said by your colleague that Indian tariffs are low, but let me try and open that up for you. When you really look at the Indian operators and you look at their performance despite those low tariffs till an EBITDA level, they compete very well with the rest of the world and in fact perform better than even higher ARPU companies across the globe. And that happens because I think the Indian operators run a very tight ship. They actually run their costs in a manner where their EBITDA margins are very healthy compared to anybody else in the world, right? And they compete, like I said, very well. The issue at the EBITDA level or at before a balance sheet issue comes up to play is around the charges that we end up paying to the government, and all operators have been cribbing saying 32% of what we earn goes in the government kitty in some form or the other, which obviously the government will have to tackle. I'm not getting there. The problem really starts below the EBITDA level because the spectrum, which is the key raw material for this industry, is probably the most expensive in our country, right? And the spectrum that's required to really offer the services, and I'll come down to that paradox a little later, but that leaves the operators with a return on capital employed in single digit. And that is very low compared to the rest of the world. If I'm an investor in India and I'm an investor rest of the world, why will I put my money here? Because I get only a 6%, 7% return on my capital employed. And with shortening of the life cycle of the technology and more frequent capital cycles, it's going to become more and more difficult with time, because a technology that used to last 10 years earlier now lasts 4 or 5 years, maximum 6 years. So I need to get my returns within that period. And that becomes a big problem. And you saw in these auctions, unlike rest of the world, when the second round of auctions happened, most big operators bid for 100 meg even in the second round. But that was not the demeanor in India. And you saw it was a very conservative bidding that happened. Now, 3 problems to answer your questions. The issue is that 80% of the voice used to get consumed outdoors, but 80% of the data gets consumed indoors. So the parameters that we had, and this is from a regulation viewpoint, the parameters that we had to measure the quality of service was outdoors before 4G era. And most of those parameters continue even today. I have not seen significant changes on how quality of service is measured, whereas the consumption is indoors because of data, right? And that's a shift that we have to make from government, from a regulator viewpoint. But from an operator viewpoint, the amount of coverage that is required, for example, in 5G, to penetrate and permeate indoors is significant. You need solutions to go in building. Therefore, you can get signal in every corner. But if you fire from outside, then you need many more sites. And I just take a example of China here. If China has 3 million, 4 million 5G sites, why is India good with 150,000, 170,000 sites? Right? And China talks about doubling this in the next 3-4 years. If we had to put that much of capital, believe you me, most of these companies will have the danger of going belly up, right? It won't happen. So I think it's chicken and egg. Raising tariffs is absolutely the right thing to be done by the operators. They'll have to go from 3 up to 300 and then probably up to 500 to sustain the quality of service, because today telecom is not equivalent to connectivity. You live your lives around telecom. Your businesses, your education, your entertainment, all is lived around this connectivity that gets offered, unlike the previous era. And therefore, if you want to be comparable to the rest of the world, if you want to be contemporary, you need to pay the price for it, because I don't expect the government to subsidize this for you. So, and the second thing, from government's viewpoint, I think the measures on what quality of services needs to undergo a change, and then the raw material and the taxation. I think the raw material, which is the spectrum, how do we bring the price down for spectrum so that these operators can have at least a double-digit return on the capital employed? And I think these are the challenges that we face. The entire dynamics of modern day use of telecom is very different from when we had 2G and 3G in India.
Right, Mr. Kapoor, I'm sure you heard the minister over there talk about the fact that he wants to make India this superpower as far as telecom is concerned. Your thoughts on that? And you've detailed some of the issues plaguing the sector, but take us in more details in terms of how does India need to emerge into that big superpower over the next decade or so?
Look, the taste of the pudding is like they say in eating it. And the people who will decide whether they can live their lives and they don't have to fall back on either internet in building or a WhatsApp call, and the operators are catering to them the way probably operators catered to them in other parts of the world, and significantly Korea, significantly Hong Kong, Singapore, Saudi, UAE, China. These are good examples that we have. Now, to make that happen, the amount of investment that's required, the number of sites that are required, both in building and outdoors, are significantly higher than what are available. That's my belief, right? And if that has to be done, how will that be possible if operators are not in a position to return their capital? So I think we have to look at how to make them viable. And we have to then pressurize them to make sure that they are delivering the right level of service to the customers, because it's quintessential for India's competitiveness, for competitiveness of the industries that play on these technologies, and individuals who live their lives around these technologies. So it is just not about connectivity, it's plus, plus, plus. And I think all the guns have to fire, and we have to be on full throttle from a 360-degree perspective. What the minister has said is definitely possible. Why should India not be comparable on its connectivity and on its services compared to the rest of the world? We get the same technology service providers. We have the same spectrum that the world has. We get the same devices. We have the same security systems. We are not going to lag back on storage systems. So we have everything in the ecosystem that the rest of the world has. I think it is shared return on your investments that you make and viability of the sector. And if the sector becomes viable and the right measures are put in place, then after that, for the operators to deliver to the customers, I think that change is definitely going to deliver what the minister really wants.
Right, Mr. Kapoor, appreciate your joining us on the broadcast. Thank you very much for that. So essentially, a lot of policy also perhaps needs to revolve around this. Well, thank you. Now, even as mobile service providers have hiked telecom tariffs last month, customers remain unhappy with the services. Says a report by local circles, 89% of those surveyed faced call connection and drop issues. Of those, 38% are facing these issues, with over 20% of their calls regularly dropping. Now, the report also shows that 1 in 3 subscribers are regularly using Wi-Fi-enabled platforms such as WhatsApp to make these calls. Let's go across to Sachin Thaparia of Local Circles to discuss this survey in detail. Good evening, Sachin. Thank you for joining us. Sachin, now despite the rise in tariffs, customers say they still face poor network quality issues. Your survey obviously indicates that customers are quite unsatisfied with the services they receive. Tell us more.
No, absolutely, Nupur. We've been getting complaints for over a year now, and we decided to do this survey, thereafter, and reached out to the complaints were from subscribers across the country. So we reached out to people in over 350 districts for this survey. And, as you said, 9 in 10 subscribers basically face call drop issues often. And as you said, 4 in 10 are basically facing this issue, more than 20% of the time. So basically, it's a hit or miss for them when they're using their regular network to make a phone call. And therefore, as you said, 4 in 10 are using these alternate networks, the OTT networks, to make these phone calls and be able to do their business call or personal calls, because they simply just cannot get the network. Now, what makes all of this, even more important, Nupur, is, 5 years ago, we were transitioning from cash to digital. Now, so many of these transactions for people are digital. Many, don't even carry cash when they are going out and about. So because there is reliance on UPI-based payments, there is reliance that, whatever store that we go to, the network would be available. And there have been cases that people have written about that they are at a checkout counter, and the 4G or the 5G is not working. They only have edge service, and they cannot conduct that financial transaction. So I think the whole call drop, poor network quality, call connection issues have taken a whole new proportion, because a lot of a lot of the digital transactions have now gotten integrated into people's lives. So that is why the resolution of this, as the telcos increase tariffs, it is extremely important that TRAI and the Ministry of Telecom basically works with the telcos to improve quality of service. And I was listening to the previous speaker, Mr. Kapoor. The benchmarks that may be out there might very well be outdated in terms of how TRAI might be measuring some of these the quality of service metrics, and they really need to be redefined to kind of figure out what is actually happening on the ground.
Now, Sachin, to people who are watching this show, one of the questions in their minds will be, does this happen more in rural areas and tier 2 and tier 3 cities? Or, is it something that happens equally in metro, so to say? So many of us actually have to resort to WhatsApp to make calls and disconnect the normal call. So that really is a problem.
Our survey indicates it's a pan-India phenomena. It's as much, in prevalence in the buildings of NCR, especially the societies that we have in Noida, Gurgaon, Ghaziabad. It's as prevalent there as it might be, let's say, on a highway in Maharashtra. So it's really, the quality of service issue is not just, non-metro or a rural thing. It might be a little bit higher in some of those tier 4, tier 5 cities and rural areas, but it's still existing pretty strong even in metros and the national capital.
Right, absolutely. Now, obviously, you have mentioned that are you going to be sharing this report with the government? Because obviously, this is something when telecom operators raise these tariffs, customers will equally want the way they to be held accountable, essentially, in terms of providing services to them.
No, we have already shared, a short summary with the TRAI leadership, and they have invited us for a meeting on the 25th of this month to discuss these findings in detail and understand, what is actually happening. So very much so, and that's the whole idea, that we learn about an issue that people are facing. We quantify it so we can kind of give them a ground reality or a consumer pulse from the ground, and let them find solutions, find policy interventions which will resolve some of these issues.
And any other big talking points that have come out from this survey, Sachin, that seem to highlight customer dissatisfaction? Of course, a large number of them do rely on internet and Wi-Fi to make calls.
Absolutely. I think, it's one of those things, Nupur, where people had expectations that after the arrival of 5G, not only will internet, mobile internet speeds improve, but something better will happen with the call drop situation. But that hasn't really happened. There is very minor improvement in terms of the severity of call drops, but it's not significant enough. And I think that's something that the operators as well as TRAI has got to communicate and create awareness about as to what to expect. Because somebody who might be looking at migrating to a 5G device or a 5G connection, they need to know what they're going to get and what they're not going to get. So that's something that is a reset of expectations, sort of, with a set of consumers. So this is just one very important issue, which is call quality, call drop, call connection issues, especially when the tariffs are going up. The other issues that we also hope to bring up and discuss with TRAI is the whole pesky calls, pesky SMSs, which basically affect the quality of service as well. So that's another huge issue that everyone is facing. And according to our own surveys, literally 9 in 10 are getting 2 or 3 spam calls daily. So that's another issue that we will bring up with TRAI as part of these discussions, and hoping that we'll get some resolution or at least a plan over the next year or so to resolve these.
Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, we've had the government talk about this and saying that these type of spam calls are something that they will need to deal with. But from your survey, is there an indication of the number of people who are actually fed up with these?
It's literally pretty much everybody, and the issue is that the DND system that they have in place today, that does not work. According to in this whole spam call issue, there is a DND system that TRAI had rolled out, which just simply does not work. And many of the individuals basically who are doing these spam calls or making these spam calls are actually using personal numbers. So, while there have been announcements that have been made by TRAI and recently the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, I think people are yet to see the real implementation of this on the ground, as to how do you kind of prevent, if it's not a brand calling, but a contractor of the brand calling and selling you insurance or selling you some kind of real estate services, how does the system disqualify them from making that next call? I think a lot of technology and a lot of solutions will need to be implemented before consumers can actually see the result. So, both of these issues are very, very critical from a consumer experience standpoint. And we are hoping that, we have a fruitful discussion with TRAI on this.
All right. On that note, it is a wrap on The Big Story. Thank you very much for joining us.